Hello, hello. Thanks everybody for joining us for another installment of our Aim for Excellence webinar series where we are breaking down strategic, operational, and career-related best practices in RevOps with leaders in the space that we admire. Again, I'm James, co-founder of Accounting. We're the modern data stack built specifically to take RevOps teams from being reactive firefighters to proactive strategic partners. Very excited to be joined by Lonny Sternberg today. Thanks for taking the time out, Lonny.
James, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and discuss. I think we've got a great agenda planned for today in terms of topics that'll add some value to the listeners.
Awesome. Lonny has had a variety of leadership roles in RevOps and ops more generally. Is a great case study for kind of adding strategic value beyond just RevOps and kind of getting a seat at the table. Now consults for a number of great SaaS businesses too. And that's the highlight. But Lonny, do you want to share a little bit more detail on your background?
Yeah, most definitely, James. I've been leading revenue operations for the last 12 plus years, and I've specialized in building diverse, specialized teams that are focused on helping to mature the revenue engines required to penetrate markets and really grow predictable revenue streams. Amongst, advising or working, fractionally with other companies amongst my full-time role, I really like to work with early stage startups and founders as well as, very mature organizations to help with the complete, revenue architecture from end to end, 0 to 150 plus $1 million and thereon.
Yeah, I'm impressed. You really kind of spanned the gamut in your experience and covered a lot of things, but I'm really excited to chat here. You've spoken kind of in the market. I think on some other podcasts around like AI and its impact on go-to-market and RevOps. But I'm excited to cover some of the more fundamentals today because I think there's a lot of talk in AI, but a lot of teams haven't even done like the blocking and tackling correctly. So we'll dive in there, which will be great. But before we get too far in the weeds, I always like to start high level. You almost alluded to this in kind of your intro, but how do you define RevOps?
Yeah, so I think traditionally speaking, if we look at like the historicals and a lot of the common nomenclature that's being used amongst the marketplace, or really how revenue operations got its footing, is a lot of folks have said, hey, it's the alignment of success, sales, and marketing. I think that the breadth and depth of RevOps has expanded quite a bit. If I was to oversimplify it and try to come up with as few words as possible, I would say it's removing friction from all revenue generating activities. Period.
That's great. And I think, revenue generating activities kind of covers the whole gamut of the customer journey,
Correct.
right? So I think that's
a very broad statement.
Yeah. A good venue to narrow down what is often a huge role in RevOps. So I like that a lot. From a career perspective, what kind of brought you into RevOps?
So, early in my career, I had the opportunity to work for, as a go-to-market leadership and strategy, B2B SaaS organization, and then continuing the evolution of my career arc, joined, a traditional B2B SaaS startup and really worked from, a complete end-to-end go-to-market blueprint customer journey, which the company had no revenue whatsoever. It was pre-revenue. I would say it's your complete traditional 0 to 1. So really climbing the operational kind of ecosystem and ladder was a generalization that was used in that organization just because of the way that it was structured to support, the gamut of all the different hats. But the real focus was everything revenue operations that we do. So it gave me the opportunity, I think, to develop some very critical and unique skill sets that allowed me to, understand the impact on the P&L, understand, customer lifecycle, customer journey, critical metrics, cap tables, but then also what are the tools, the people, the process, and the systems that are all used to ultimately impact, revenue generating activities.
That's great. And we often talk with our guests about how do you make RevOps a strategic function? And I think you have done that based on that description. I think that's what makes RevOps really interesting. I think what a lot of mid-career people where they might falter is thinking of it as just like a taskmaster role we talk about a lot. And I think you kind of expanding the scope there is what keeps it really interesting. Is what keeps people.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think that there's that evolution where earlier stages of the organization, I was the taskmaster, right?
Yeah, totally.
Completely implementing a CRM, moving from spreadsheets to dedicated systems, tying everything together, then working amongst organizations. So you move from IC to a little bit of management to ideally to more of a strategic function. But I think that there's a need to consistently have the knowledge and the ability to be tactical and strategic and to move vertically and horizontally throughout the business, no matter what point of the company you're in or what point of the career cycle.
100%. Definitely still have to know the tactics to be successful. And that's actually a great segue. So, we talked about being AI ready, but we got to do the basics before that. Can you share what it means to be AI ready, to get to that point?
Yeah, so it's no secret that AI is the conversation of choice for many people today, and I'm a huge fan, to be very clear. I think that AI has the potential to, radically infuse a lot of different tactics, approaches, and frankly, turn a lot of assumptive, fundamentals on their head. I think that we're in this kind of era that's two phases right now. I think one is we're moving very, very, very fast at lightning speed, towards a target state, which I don't know that everyone knows, but we know that AI is helping us get there. But I think at the same time, we're also fundamentally, you have another kind of group of individuals that I think that's what we're going to talk about today too, is that, hey, we need to really lock down the block and tackle, right? We need to block and tackle. We need to figure out exactly what we need to do. So where would we infuse AI? So I'm a big proponent of really understanding the basics, the core logic of the business, and breaking down the processes, the systems, the tools, and then really gathering that information and collectively communicating it with everybody. So to be AI ready, you have to have repeatable, you have to have scalable, and you have to have sustainable. Of course, you can minimize some tasks and you can remove some things. But to do it well and do it consistently, and I think really get the AI to perform at its best, and as it gets smarter and better and more mature, if the more information that you provide consistently and accurately, I think those are going to be the winners in this space.
Yeah, repeatable, scalable, sustainable. That's a good way to narrow it down. If we were to double click like one layer deeper, what do those three things like mean kind of tactically for a revenue organization?
Yeah, so I think, as the organization gets larger and thinking about this question strategically, it's harder to keep everybody aligned, right? When we talk about alignment as a generalized term, but what if we really double click into it, to your words, and dial into the details, I think it's really a matter of setting the top line most critical metric, whether it be a KPI, an OKR, and laddering everything up to what needs to be achieved, and then designing everything around that from every department. So vertically and then horizontally saying like, look, yes, you're going to have fundamental KPIs or OKRs for your group and your department and your directs respectively, but it all needs to drive this one outcome. And if everybody is clear on that objective, I think then, that's when the magic starts happening and you start really achieving those goals. Too often I have seen and found that there's just too many goals or too many objectives trying to please, everybody. So what happens is you end up with a bunch of disparate objectives amongst leaders, and then that's when you start to have a lack of a first team principle amongst your executive team, and you start to have breakdown and alignment. So everyone's like, well, I need to hit this metric. Well, why are you doing it, right? So I think simple equals better.
Yeah, so well put. And I think in the context of AI too, like you can't just unleash AI to run wild, right? Like it has to be moving towards a goal. And I think that's a perfect encapsulation of kind of how to do that. So you talked about what it means to be unified. You talked about some of the tactical steps of like laddering to actually get unified go to market. And beyond like the metric layout, any other steps needed to get there? It might be that covers it, but I'm curious if there's anything else top of mind.
I think it's really a fundamental understanding of what is trying to be achieved, but more systematically, I think if we go back to the fundamental principles of like removing friction, I think there's a lot of fatigue in the buyer's journey. And if everybody is saying like, look, if we want to make this a delightful world-class experience, if we want to remove as much friction and make it easy to buy for us, and we want to deliver value on day one and thereafter, what would we need to do as an organization? Right? And then from there, then you can bring more people into the room and you can start breaking down those specific objectives. And then you can use the fundamentals such as OKRs or KPIs and laddered goals and SMART goals and different frameworks and change management and influencing with and without authority. I think, but before that, you really need to decide like what can we control and what are we going to react to. So like the macroeconomics, can't necessarily control. But you can control the microeconomics internally within the organization. So if you reach a point where there's fluidity, there's trust, there's consistency, and everybody is just really, really clear, akin to a pit crew of some racing analogy, whether it be Formula One or something else, that everybody knows exactly what has to happen, no matter what. So as you're, reaching some form of a constraint or a blocker or something of that nature, you have to figure out the solution and overcome. I think getting to that mental state and then being really clear on the tactical, you then can focus on the solution versus fighting the dynamics of the relationships based on having that top line level of clarity. Does that make sense?
It does. A really good tactical definition to what it means to be aligned and how you actually reach it, which is great because I think a lot of people talk about misalignment broadly, but there's not a lot of what does that actually mean. So I think that's really
Yeah,
good.
I think that the OKRs and the KPIs, I think those are tools, right? But those aren't solutions.
Yeah.
And if we talk about looking at forward looking versus, historical looking, and we talk about effortless collaboration and consistency and reliability on metrics, I think a lot of the time it's a reactive state. And if you're using the historical metrics to say, hey, this is what we know, but we're also making a bet on something in the future. So you've got to be in the position where you can have as much real-time data, real-time analysis, not flipping the strategy too frequently because you got to let it play out. Mm-hmm. But I think too far, and that's where AI and some other deeper conversations, maybe another podcast comes in, is, hey, how are we setting ourselves up to have real-time evaluation versus historically we've always looked at, run rates of the past and made future decisions.
Yeah, tell me a bit about that for anyone listening that needs to take that step of real-time analytics to guide them in analysis. How do you accomplish that? I think it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, I think, if I was to go back to, I think a very common principle, it's really understanding the journey end to end. Every business is a little bit different. And I think that there's some, and I was just having this conversation actually, yesterday via LinkedIn with Josh about the idea that, hey, what are some critical metrics? And I think the metrics from 0 to 10 million, 10 to 20, 30 to 40, et cetera, are going to be a little different. But I think it's being very, very clear on, what is important to your ICP at that juncture. And then making sure that you are intimate with that blueprint, that end-to-end journey. And then how to real-time analytics and tracking and visibility, not just tracking, but visibility and reliability on that information to be able to monitor the health and how things are going. But that may not be the same metric when you get to, say, 40, 50 plus $million. That may be more of, readiness, awareness, and maturity to be able to say, hey, how do we have more inorganic growth? And how do we conjoin these different motions, different go-to-market teams, these different platforms and products to be able to deliver on the diversity of our ICP that we have just ingested?
Yeah, tell me about the visibility piece there, because you kind of covered standing up the metrics, figuring out what the metrics are. I think there's another challenge of how do I get folks to actually look at them and action them and drive the business with them?
Yeah, I think there's some really neat products. I think you guys got some offerings out there today that help with that. There's a lot of really great products. Talk about back to AI a little bit. It's allowing people to really get to market a lot quicker with some tooling and I would say some lower cost entry points that have historically been people have been priced out of that market if they're earlier in the business life cycle. But I think it's the reliability and the dependability. So yes, having the tool and having the process, but if we take the most basic step back and look, how do we collect that data? And where does it come from? And do we have reliable, inputs and outputs? And are we moving that data into a visualization piece? And is that visualization piece real time? Is there a lag? Are we waiting for different departments to report in? Do we have disparate collection techniques and different people that own different pieces, but really it should stay housed in one area. So if we can consolidate, I think, into the right respective areas, and then everyone becomes an absolute expert on those specific pieces, and we're able to deliver those reliable metrics real time, then we don't end up with the common problem that you and I hear about almost daily about FP&A and finance has 10 and we're saying it's 7 and it's okay, I can't rely on anything. What's the number, right? Is it an average between the two? So I think that's the age problem that we always have, but I think having some, again, using the framework, not people, process, and tech, but people, process, systems, right? What are the systems and the tooling?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. It really resonates with why we built accounting was to kind of bring the benefits of a data warehouse without needing all of those resources. So let's push it out to some of these more up and coming teams, and let's build in some workflows to actually put those desired actions based on the metrics, right in front of people without really kind of having to wait for that lag.
Yeah,
So,
and then to double click a little bit deeper into that, James, what the other component and that I've been talking a lot amongst the community and my peers have been really making sure that the incentives and the management objectives are aligned around the activities, the collection, the visualization, and then the influencing of changing those numbers. Because when we're collecting that information, if we know the expectation and everyone is really clear and the management objectives, the incentive, compensation plans, et cetera, the culture is really surrounding that energy, then I think it becomes more consistent. And now we can start infusing AI to automate that, whether it be the traditional CRM route or some other form of a little bit more lightweight offerings in the marketplace and connecting them all at different points.
yeah, totally. I'm always reminded. I think Warren Buffett said it: "Show me the incentives, and I'll show you the outcome." Or maybe it was his.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's the pithiest, best quote on that front. It's so true. Really helpful, Lonny, and thanks for running through that. Any other kind of key processes that we've missed here that a go-to-market org needs to be getting correct in terms of like the blocking and tackling for AI, or do you think like this is kind of the foundation here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's breaking out, just double clicking back on what we talked about a little bit more about, understanding what you're reacting to versus where you're, what are you running away from versus running towards. I think making sure that you have those consistent processes, and I think really an expectation, understanding of what AI is going to do versus what it's not going to do. So I think there's an educational component to everybody inside the organization on like how to best effectively use it, right? And then I think there's buying and aligning the current tooling and offering, whether it's third party or whether you can intersect some of your proprietary software pieces to inject that AI at certain points. And then there's a matter of I think getting the ability to execute with more speed and more precision and more reliability. So specifically, I think AI has the ability to return a lot of real-time data and then even get into a lot, better forecasting and analytics, frankly, than what you or I could do because, human beings are not the best at predicting the future. But if we're using computer modeling and we can get that back to that basic process and we know it's true and tried, then frankly, it should be right every time.
Yeah, totally. We've spoken offline a bit about this and concept of like go-to-market data backup, and I'm kind of struck with that last comment around, if AI is going to use all this information and be more effective than a human, like it kind of has to have that historical corpus of data, right? Which I think a lot of companies actually lack, especially on like the more up-and-coming, call it seed, Series A, Series B level, doesn't have the chance to invest in like kind of a full data stack. I mean, it's easy to overlook, but like what should people be thinking about when it comes to kind of this topic?
Yeah, so I really enjoy this question because I have most recently been in a spot where you are adding more and more and more users to the CRM, specifically Salesforce. And as you're building this reliance, any type of outage, loss of data, or anything else can be detrimental to the business. And so often, and everything that we've talked about, thinking in advance of this conversation, everything that we're saying, it's idealistic, right? It's like, this is what you want to strive for, but we're also trying to run a business during the day and, grow sales and put out fires and take care of clients, et cetera, et cetera. So I think getting this alignment and why alignment is such a big thing is so difficult is because everyone's busy, right? So going back to the data and the redundancy and the backup, I think it's something that often gets overlooked to say, do we have any recovery for our core go-to-market data? And most of the time in the CRM, if there was something catastrophic or accidental, yes, you have some, recycle bins and some other components, but there's not really a phenomenal solution out there. And it could take, days and days and weeks to recorrect a mistake. I've been there. Where it's accidental. You have a new hire and, unfortunately they're like, oh yeah, I got rid of that field, and all of a sudden everything goes. So I think there's an opportunity, frankly, and something that I've been very interested in, I've been asking for is a more cost-effective way that is not 100% seat-based.
Yeah.
Or that is not connected to my, hundreds of thousands of dollars, platform or contract, where I can have some form of a reliable, almost some form of a mirror to the data as it changes or real time. So some of these smaller platforms are becoming very intelligent where they're reacting to the data real time. But how about some type of snapshot over time, that is built for RevOps folks?
Yeah, and that's definitely the approach we're taking, and we'll keep that nameless. But on the business model side, it's really a point well taken too. Where some of the big players, I think it's like a 30% upcharge on your existing contract, which is just kind of like a wild finger in the air thing.
Yeah, it makes it, I think, cost prohibitive, and that when you're trying to advocate for, ROI, are you looking at growth and revenue generation, or are you looking at business continuity? And
Yeah.
where do you expense that? So that's usually a lot of the things that I'm focusing on is like, what is the ROI? Where can I remove redundancies and what I call flatten the stack and simplify versus adding just more layers of things that are continuity versus revenue generating.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. I also wanted to touch on maybe slightly aside from data backup. You made a really, I think, salient point, and I hear it a lot from the RevOps folks. And it's in line with how we talked about how do you get from being a taskmaster to being strategic. You said RevOps folks are really busy. You're fighting fires every day. So if we kind of take a step back, like obviously you've done this throughout your career based on your career trajectory. How do you protect your time in RevOps? Like there's always a million and one things to do, but you need to keep like that bigger picture of the customer journey zoomed out. Are we, removing all friction from the process? Like any advice for folks who might be, more junior in their careers of how they can do this?
Most definitely. I think that I look at it as like there's bridging the gap or bridging between tactical and strategic. And when you need to move in between both of them daily or even hourly or sometimes be able to think for different objectives, I think that there's kind of time-based projects that are more longer term. I think that there's asks, right? If I put it into another framework or category, like that's just real time, whether it be email, Slack, text, phone call, any mode of communication. And then there's this like, where are we taking the business? Like, let's call it just strategy for lack of better terms right now. I think creating visibility to a process. I like to use sprints and have planning sessions similar to like a product team, Scrum, Agile, etc. And say, look, we're going to do 2-week sprints and we're going to publish our board or wherever we're keeping this medium, so you have visibility and you have a line to understand. A lot of folks, I think, especially on the go-to-market teams, are resistant to wanting to put a ticket in because they're like, oh, great, a ticket, I'm just another number. But it really is a phenomenal way to keep track of everything and to prioritize. And then you can say, like, look, this is what we're working on. And then you can organize it by sprint and deployment. You can tie it back out to a key metric. You can organize it, up front, and you can plan out. And then you can see and track, through analytics, like what is the diversity or the segmentation of the type of request. So I think that's number one. Number two is having the ability to build trust early on in these relationships. And to build trust with the team and say, look, we are here to serve and we are here to I don't, it's sometimes you have to be neutral. It's sometimes you have to be, very focused on, no, my number one goal is to help remove friction from revenue generating activities. I think amongst that conversation, you need to build trust and a relationship early on so you can be in the position to go in the conversation and say, I really want to help you, James. Can you help me understand how you think this is going to impact the business? Or what objective or OKR does this roll up to? Or I know you're trying to hit a number. Can you help me understand? Okay, great. Thank you. You've been heard. It's genuine. You're using empathy. And you're like, let me get back to you after I evaluate that. Let me talk to some people that are a little smarter than me, the experts, et cetera, and then come back. And I think then you get folks kind of thinking about what you're up against. It's like, I've got to focus on what's going to really make, not all activity is going to lead to impact.
Yeah, I think that's the best answer I've heard to that. It balances like the micro kind of human interaction, but also like the macro like process. I'm a huge fan of sprints, and I also think like I'm guilty of asking people for requests without fully thinking it through. But just getting them in the habit of thinking through why am I asking for this, you make them kind of go through that a couple times, and I've found that they become a lot more thoughtful and understanding of like what they should even prioritize on that.
And I think if you combine 1 and 2 within that framework, then you have the ability to say like, okay, most of the things that are being asked are tactical, or or we don't have a lot of self-serving capabilities, or there's a big disconnect between what we do and what the expectation of what we do is. Yeah. So I think that allows you to now move into that strategic lens and really focus on, if you're given the autonomy and you're provided a seat at the table, which I think we all talk about within revenue operations, you can say, look, like strategically, this is where we need to have one message and one voice, from the executive layer.
Yeah, that's great. And the irony here is that, like, I think the executive team, CEOs, CROs, CMO, they want RevOps to be strategic because that's how you add value. But at the same time, they're often the ones that inadvertently cause a lot of this firefighting. Just because I don't blame them, there's a lot of stuff going on. But I think with that sprint process, you can kind of track where you're spending time and surface that. They might be surprised at the negative side of, oh, wow, you're not able to spend any time on the things that really move the needle. And so
I've experienced it a lot of the time. It's usually the revenue operations is faced with like a double negative, right? Where it's like, if I say no, I'm going to be the person that's always saying no.
Yeah.
So I might as well just do it. But then am I expanding the scope of what I really should be working on?
Totally.
Because a lack of departmental organization or something somewhere else.
Well, Lonny, this has been great. We're almost at time here. We'd like to finish with a rapid fire finish of just some common questions across RevOps leaders. So, first thing that comes to mind, one sentence answer. Biggest myth about RevOps?
That they're tacticians.
Biggest sales rep pet peeve?
I don't have time to enter any information, and I don't know where to find it.
If you could fix one challenge in RevOps, what would it be?
A lack of general understanding and alignment amongst the entire organization.
And last one here. How would you describe a great RevOps leader in 3 words?
Empathetic, strategic, disciplined.
I love it. I think that's a great one. Lonny, appreciate the time. I think this was really excellent. A lot of things to be thinking about kind of before implementing AI, which I know is very top of mind. So I think listeners will be able to take a lot of actionable advice from this. Anyone listening, if you have questions for Lonny, feel free to funnel them my way and I'll kind of track them down for you. Of course, if you have questions about accounting or data, generally happy to chat there. But Lonny, thanks a lot for the time.
James, awesome. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Until next time.
All right.